high school level, and on the right side with the stage where he entered the army. So I tell you something about Günther Enderlein, his life, always in context, not about his person, I don't mind about his person at all personally, but how he was enabled to develop his researches, his findings about the endobiontical cytogeny. If we understand this by looking on his life, we later on can understand more easily his researches. So that we have a time context, I have some figures when he lived. For example, we start with 1916. In the Society Nature Acquiring Friends, an article was published from Enderlein as a zoologist and professor, director of the Zoological Museum in Berlin. This communication concerned a revolutionary redesign of bacteriology. This time, typically favorized was the bacteriology in case of monomorphism. One bacteria always produce the same bacteria. Enderlein had worked out these researches during the war years. He was voluntarily enlisted for the military service in the army as a bacteriologist. Even if he was a zoologist, he was specialized on researching insects. But he had at the army as a bacteriologist the salary of a medical officer, and therefore it was possible for him from a financial point of view to operate further researches in a private lab, which he could afford by this salary. So he was working at the military in a laboratory and at home in his own laboratory in addition. In his military service he was asked to research pathogens. The reason for that was that tuberculosis, cholera and other diseases had cost the military more soldiers than the war itself. So for the military was from a very important impact to have bacteriologists. And he, as insect specialist, has something to do with those little things, so he's a bacteriologist in this case. Funny in this context was that he had another way of thinking coming from the insect level. He had another view than a biologist from bacteria level. And looking from this point of view, he worked with other research approaches and with other principles. And he used this for the research of bacteria. For example, typically you look at insects in their whole life stage and environmental context. With the bacteria, he thought how to do this, and he had special slides which are had a small kind of hole, not a hole through, but it was the using of a hanging drop, which means he had a cover glass, taking the bacteria on it, put it on a slide with a smooth hole on it, and taking wax around, so it's an isolated biological system without influence from outside. And then over hours, days, weeks, months, he looked all the time how those bacteria in this own capsule situation will behave and develop in this hanging drop. In this isolated biosphere, you have the situation that any liquids and nutrition and gases are metabolized by the bacteria. bacteria and then changing the milieu inside. And the longer it takes, the more bacterial specific variety of behaviors occur. So exactly and over such a long period, no one before him had looked into the world of microbes. And Enderlein was therefore able to prove a complex development cycle whose stages are dependent on the respective living conditions. So the bacteria change their behavior and their shapes depending on the surrounding milieu. He was the first found that out in this isolated cover glass situation. Before him, about 200 entomological works, from him 200 entomological works was published, so he was already well known in the world of insects. But bacteria was a new situation for him. Here you see Enderlein with his first wife, Anna Louise Jacob. But she became ill during the war years at a typical tuberculosis. And therefore Enderlein went along with her to the clinic to Switzerland in Davos to Dr. Karl Spengler. Spengler was well known as a specialist or a successful specialist in tuberculosis research, and he shared his knowledge about tuberculosis and syphilis with Enderlein. From these findings and his own research, Enderlein developed a product for the treatment of tuberculosis. Unfortunately, too late for his wife, so she died of tuberculosis 1920 on the consequences of her disease. By Enderlein's tuberculosis research on the so-called Friedman vaccines, he developed products and get serious conflicts with the German Robert Koch Institute, which was responsible for all those vaccines and researches on that. From the leader of this institute, Enderlein was commented as he entered an area without having the needed knowledge for that, because he's specialist of insects, you know. And no one take care about the work and the researches he had done, because, sorry, you're a specialist on insects. I don't mind what you have found out. Enderlein tried his research, tied his research always to the work of Professor Friedman, because Friedman was very popular with his results, and he couldn't swipe away such easily. But Friedman was a half Jew. And as you know, from historical point of view, in this time, Jews were problems, a political situation in Germany, as everywhere in Europe, but especially in Germany. And so Friedman was not the best person to fit on, caused by his half-Jew status and the emerging Nazi regime. So Enderlein, at the end of the 30s, was always trying to develop his vaccines, and therefore he get the producing director of the company Sanum for the production of the tuberculosis vaccine called Utilin. Utilin was a famous preparation for that. Later on, Enderlein presented his own so-called SVS Enderlein, which is a type of Utilin. In 1939, he founded his own microbiological institute, which was later on renamed in the institute IBICA. Each Sanum expert may have heard about IBICA. So in 1933 appeared a writing of Enderlein which called for the abolition of the rule of the cell as the smallest biological unit. So he said, no, the cell is not the smallest biological unit. There's something smaller living. The cell is not the smallest part. Well, this was a revolution there in this time, and therein he disagreed with the typical opinion of biology. So this is a kind of very hard confrontation at this time.
Which year was that, do you know? You know exactly which year he came up with that statement?
1933.
1933.
Cells don't represent the smallest units in a multicellular organism. He looked in the cell rather at a state of formations from smallest visible units forming cells. So it's a kind of family. A cell is a kind of family. After Enderlein, the environmental conditions are critical for the pathogenicity of a bacteria or a pathogen. So it's milieu depending. Not the bacteria or the living unit is causing something, but the surrounding milieu is developing how this living unit will behave. Are the environmental parameters for higher levels of development of the endobiont given? It would cause uplift of polynuclear cell shapes. You can see, or we can see later on the poster. So it's kind of up move depending on the milieu. Enderlein, based on the cancer studies of a gynecologist called Dr. Otto Schmidt, and in the studies on the cancer problem, 1931 to 1937, together with the oncologist Egbert Frick, he found out a multiform microorganism in the blood, which he blamed for the carcinogenesis. He was not the first in this time, and he knew this, so he based on Otto Schmidt, and Otto Schmidt based on, but this is the historical part. If we would have time tomorrow in the evening, we can show on this up to 1500 somewhere. Yeah? And Enderlein thought about that and found out that there had to be a former symbiotic step millions of years ago as the basis for those microorganisms he self-called in 1943 with the name endobiont. He regarded this endobiont as the primal symbiont of all vertebrates, of all living, higher developed animals. Without never, there would have been the development of bone structures, for example. So everything would have bones, has developed after having this symbiotic get-together. This convertible microorganism in the blood is not harmful in its primitive phase. There, it's very wealthful in a symbiotic way. It has many, or it possesses many positive attributes and is involved in a number of important functions in the organism. Throughout life, when life's going on, however, life is getting weaker and weaker the older we get. And thereby, we are confronted with many factors changing our own milieu and our own repair system, which caused a change in the milieu, and this microbe is acquiring parasitic properties up to a cancer pathogen universe level, and then attack previously tissues and organs. These factors include beneath external factors, especially the way of behavior and nutrition, especially with a too high level of animal food, which means proteins. The endobiont is a protein-eating using structure, but also a number of so-called pleasure poisons, such as alcohol, tobacco, which has a big influence on milieu factors in the metabolism of the body. Also, of course, chemicals and physical effects like electromagnetic fields, radiation, and whatever, which could have influence on the milieu. Enderlein's view was that the endobiont is a multiform, he called it concrete bacteria mold organism, with the highest development found out was a fungus called Mycorrhizamosus frese. You will find this expression on the top of the cyclodyny there, poster. So what is a Mycorrhizamosus frese? In 1870, the Mycorrhizamosus as a fungus was discovered by a guy called Fresen. Yeah, so it's called Mycorrhizamosus fresen as a typical polymorphism organism which developed to a fungus, typically found everywhere in the ground and on damp or wet walls in the late 1800s, 1900s. Everywhere it was as a fungus found, and make problems especially to cattle, to horses, and as a pathogen with many infections of myxates, making problems to the arterias and veins. The spores breathe in, get into the blood, stick on the arteria walls, and then they grow into the tissues and making problems there. And therefore it was causing thrombosis and circulation problems, health problems. So the Mycorrhizamosus fresen was very well known. At humans, typically allergies are caused by this fungal infections. Enderlein told this concrete stage of the fungus in 1916 as the actual symbiotic structure of man. So the smallest entities of this Mycorrhizamosus fresen, he gave them several names we see later on, were causing symbiotic functionalities in the body. And then I took the view that Mycor fungus, millions of years in the age of the Cambrian, caused the species explosion of the planet, because he was founding the development of all, it's called mammals, I've never heard that expression before, mammals? Yeah. You know that? Really? Wow. Okay, when mammals appeared, was caused by the symbiosis with the Mycor species, because then all those structures like bones, shapes, and developed based on this symbiotic situation. We'll see later on. And over millions of years, this former parasite coagulations. So if there was a wound, he could build fibrin and platelets to glue this wound and help the organism to survive. This is based on the mucoracinosis, symbiotic behavior. When you think about the fibrin filaments we saw before, and I call them fibrils, and about the thrombocytes, both fibrin and thrombocytes from endoline perspective are part of the development of the mucoracinosis phase with a symbiotic behavior to keep the organism healthy. Little by little, in the 200 years of blood diagnostics, around 200 researchers made similar observations, independent from each other. Every one of them agreed that there is a microbial life in every cell in the blood, on all membranes, and those are responsible for keeping healthy, have a really big importance on the health situation. The thing is that most of them couldn't interchange as easily as we could today via internet, phone, computer, however. So it took years to get the information from France to Germany, from Germany to somewhere. So they worked independent from each other, which caused the same outfindings with a hell of names. For example, Siphonospora polymorpha, Leptotrichia vocalis robin, Onchomyxia, Amöbia cachexia, tongue-breaking things. But in general, they have all the same outfindings, but not in that detailed level as endoline did. So it's important to keep in mind, anytime you hear some strange expressions calling on those living corpuscles in the blood, basically it's all the same. The strange thing is, in actual times, or let's say since 1960s, 1970s, there even were many researchers found out something of that. But they have known about endoline and von Bremer as a minimum basic. But they also thought, but in my way it's a very special thing, I found out, and they gave them special expressions because they came from a very special point of view. For example, they found out this is not endobiont, it's a trichomoniasis. Or another researcher, this is not an endobiontical thing, it's a candida problem. It's a covered candida in separate levels. Or another researcher, no, it's all a Borrelia problem. The reason behind that is, for example, in Germany we have a very famous Borrelia Institute, and they typically have patients, they have all Borrelia problem. Found out with antibodies exactly in the laboratory, and all of them have special experience in the blood. So they took those pictures of the blood and said this is a Borrelia problem. They don't mind that a patient with let's say rheumatism or multiple sclerosis or whatever have the same appearances. Because they only have Borrelia patients, see those appearances, and think vice versa, those appearances must be caused by Borrelia. It's true, if you have, for example, that disease, you have those experiences based on the bad milieu and the inflammational background. But you can't say those appearances are Borrelias. Yeah? So this vice versa thought has not been researched and making many problems today in misunderstanding many things, especially overseas. US, in Australia, wherever. So there are many researchers finding out special things and giving free names to them, not basing on underlying, but thinking they are basing on those researchers without proving it. Back to underline, the idea of the cyclogeny came from the Greek cyclos, circle, and genos is meaning the same origin as a basis, cyclogeny. And the influence of the environmental system is an important foundation in the history of vital blood analysis. And is the basic of the knowledge of pleomorphistic microbes or microbe behavior of those living particles, which is milieu related in the therapy, where the therapy should be based on the processing of the history and the blood diagnostics. Typically, the experience is bound to a microscope to see those structures, but not only on Darkfield microscope. It could be any other, for example, a phase contrast too. But it's important to have the background of, from a scientific point of view, but more from a pleomorphistic point of view, to understand what ethylene means with a milieu therapy by using a microscope, make the research of the blood and fit it to an individual therapy for a patient. Really famous was underline, called by a struggle. Was in the German press. The war about a remedy. There was a cancer remedy called Mutalin. This drug was prepared from a mucorracemose phase, from this antibacterial stage of a mucorracemose phase. Enderlein put this preparation together and presented it to many colleagues, but they didn't take care about that. They weren't interested, not to the remedy and not to the systematic studies behind. The reason for that, the Second World War appears. So there were other problems they were confronted with. And after the war, Enderlein tried to get an official recognition of his research results. But the medicine had other struggles and post-war problems and didn't care about his findings. There were other priorities. But there was this World Press thing, 1952, caused by a little girl in the United States having a Hodgkin's disease, and bring to the point Enderlein with his remedy help there, and there was a journalist of Strasbourg who joined this story and published it, and therefore he was getting very famous. And as always in history, when someone suddenly is very famous and helpful and successful, the opportunity is not far away. And therefore there came many partly criminal critics on him. For example, they got into his laboratory and took away things from him and told them where there are dramatic milieu factors on his hygienic situation with insect specialists and insect with that. No way. It was not based on truth, and he could prove this. Enderlein could prove this, but it took him years, and it took him in Germany the success at all. So, but he was famous and really asked researchers, especially overseas, so in the US, but not in Germany anymore at this case. He had to close
Some are calling it genocide.
Sorry.
at least he had to close his institute. Well,
So which remedy was that? Actually, what was that remedy called at that time?
I guess Mutadin. Mutadin.
Mutarin, they call it Mutarin.
In general, Enderlein wrote, my general purely biological studies and publications on the microbes since 1894 provided the full knowledge of pleomorphism since 1916. During World War I, he was able to demonstrate a multi-phased growth behavior of those bacteria and developed his bacteria cycloin. It's this book. Okay, this is not the print from First World War, of course. It's all of his work with any detailed scripts of him, very, very great, but hard to understand. Because he's jumping from left to the right, you have to jump always backward, forward. So it's really hard, especially with his expressions, but very detailed with his pictures. This was published after 1925, caused by the World War I. And at least caused by his Greek, how do you call it? He had to describe or develop new words for the structures he found to avoid any problems with the bacteria research of other biologists. Therefore, it was very complex to understand him, which caused that after the Second World War, no one take care about this work. It was too complex, and they had to do a lot of work anyway, and so it wasn't developed and recognized anymore. Until Dr. Elke Krämer, in this case without doctor, this is her doctor work, make a medical historical work of Enderlein, and this is this book. All he wrote and found out, and his living circumstances are put together in this book, so that anybody can understand it from today's perspective. Very good book,